This is Module 1 of Ideology, Culture, and Government. We're going to focus very quickly, and this will be a short module, on the idea of where Americans lie on the ideological spectrum. And then I want to give you a bit of an introduction to a resource that you can go and look at and help you to understand your own personal ideology. So let's just start out with some Gallup polls. And if we take a look at the Gallup polls, we find that, over the last 30 years, between 1992 and 2023, we have seen the number of conservatives in the United States remain relatively steady. It's reached about 40% at some points in time, but more or less in the mid 30s. And we've also seen the amount of moderates in the United States remain relatively consistent, although it's dropped a bit over the last several decades. We have about as many moderates as conservatives in the United States. Now, the interesting trend line that we have seen is it would appear as though some moderates have become more liberal. If you take a look at 1992, we had less than 20% of Americans describing themselves as being liberal. And now in 2023, there are 25% of Americans describing themselves as being liberal, according to the Gallup surveys. So we tend to be then, taking a look at this, a center-right nation, with conservatives and moderates about equal and liberals coming in a bit behind. Now, there is a differentiation, though, between social and economic issues. And when it comes to social issues, we've seen a very interesting kind of trend over the last 25 years. This is for 2024 from 2020. And we saw that back in 2000, about almost 40% described themselves as very conservative or conservative. And about the same amount of people said that they were moderate. And the amount of people that considered themselves to be very liberal was about 20%, and it currently is much higher. So fast forward, we see a couple bumps here and there. And by the time we reach 2024, we've gone from having on social issues, abortion, gay marriage, things like this, we've gone from a clear conservative plurality, a center-right plurality in social issues, to currently in 2024 having all three really being within the margin of error, and about a third of the country being very conservative on social issues, about a third being moderate, and about a third being very liberal or liberal. So we've seen a pretty drastic change then over the last 2.5 decades when it comes to people's views of social issues here in the United States. Now, on the other hand, we see a trend line that's pretty similar to what we saw to the overall American center-right coalition when it comes to economic issues. So in looking at that, Republicans and moderates were roughly about the same in 2000, and we saw less than 20%, about 17, 18% of Americans describing themselves as being very liberal or liberal when it comes to economic issues. Now, we've, pretty much still got that center-right coalition. Conservatives have declined a little bit, and the moderates are pretty much about the same amounts. But what we do see, again, the same way that we saw with social issues, is that there's a rising amount of Americans who consider themselves to be very liberal or liberal when it comes to economic issues. So that's risen from about, 17, 18% up to about 23% in 2024. So again, we still remain center-right when it comes to economic issues, but there has been an increase in the amount of people that define themselves as being liberal, although not quite as much as what we saw when it came to the social issues. Now, one thing I would encourage people to do is try to figure out where they lie on the ideological spectrum. Certainly, it's not liberal, moderate continuum. And if you take a look at Pew Research Center, They have a beyond red versus blue, the political typology. Um, and this is a quiz that you can take and kind of see where you fall on the ideological spectrum. And in addition to that quiz, there's also a lot of data about where Americans fall. So this gives us a better understanding of the fact that, among conservatives, among liberals, there's not just one type of conservative or one type of liberal, rather there are various varieties of them. And if you take a look at this, these are kind of the outcomes of their surveys that were taken in July 2021. And we see that there are extremes here. And what we see is that the darker red or almost kind of crimson color are the most conservative conservatives. So faith and flag conservatives. The deepest blue of the liberals are the progressive left. And what's interesting to see here is that, they are a very relatively small proportion of Americans, and that most Americans fall more towards the center. So if we take a look at the right-hand slide from Pew, in this same survey, what we see is that the people that are most politically engaged also happen to be the more ideological. So the progressive left and the faith and flag conservatives are the most politically engaged in the United States. However, those people who are a little bit less ideological tend to fall right smack dab in the middle. And oftentimes they are the people that consume less information about government and public affairs. So we have a kind of a catch-22 here, particularly in political science. We like to encourage people to be politically engaged and to be aware of the issues that are going on in our country. But at the same time, the more politically engaged that you get, the more likely it is that you're going to be more highly ideological, which also means that you're leading to kind of more splintered and partisan society.